And our next speaker is one such case. Um, Obviously, Altay is well known to everyone in the room after today's activities, but also because of his scholarship. And his scholarship is quite wide-ranging. So, in fact, it never surprised me that he came to work on Homer. I think, as you said before, larger mythological structures through your Black Sea work and geographical work. So today, Altay is going to speak to us on Scylla and Charybdis, migrating gates to the other world.
Thank you, Andrew. So I really feel ashamed presenting after your excellent paper, which has so much methodological rigor. What I'm going to present are glimpses into the work that I'm doing, which is still a lot work in progress. And I really have to engage more closely with the grammar of geography and movement in Homer that you have developed for us. That's extremely helpful. And I think Gladstone, whom you have introduced to us this morning, Jonathan, would also have very much appreciated your grammar. I think it would have been a little clearer with your help. So let me give you some background into the work I've been doing recently on mytho-geography. My headline is Pantarei, Getting Lost in Mytho-geography, which what I've been doing for the last couple of years. I'm intrigued by things that I see, riddles that I try to solve, and the complexity of the geography/mythography that interact with each other in sometimes mysterious, sometimes, however, quite transparent ways. So what is mytho-geography? Instead of giving you a definition, I give you one example from one of my recent publications. This is a segment of the Tabula Peutingeriana, and it shows the eastern part of the Black Sea. Yeah, it's a little compressed, and I unfortunately cannot explain the logic of the Tabula Peutingeriana, which is not quite the same as our modern maps. But we see that we have a sequence of cities on the southeastern coast from Amisos over Polemonium to Trapezus now in the northeast, and we find then again very far off to the east, even closer to the Northern Ocean, the Apsaros. In reality, these cities are all in one line from the mid-eastern Anatolian coast to the very eastern coast. And what I've been trying to show is that this is not just ignorance. This is not just sloppiness, as has been the most prominent explanation, but rather there are traditions behind this that are grounded in mythical, in mytho-geographical and ideological political backgrounds, which are quite complicated, which lead us back ultimately to mysterious Aya, the kingdom of Aetes, where so many different mythical traditions align, starting with Athamas, Leucatea, Phrixos, Hele, and then Aetes, his daughter Medea, Jason, and the Argonauts, who intersect also with a tiny little bit with the Odyssey. And there has been kind of a race of claiming the inheritance of Aya or the territory of Aya in the Eastern Black Sea. As far as I could figure out, the first city that we can identify to have raised this claim is Dioscurias in the northeastern recess of the Black Sea. I can't go into further detail here, but what allowed me to make a new suggestion for the location of Dioscurias, which is not firmly identified today because there's so much sedimentation in the Eastern Black Sea, is that we need to look more carefully at the mythical and literary traditions and the mythical land and riverscapes And what I found is that the land and riverscape of Dioscurias has incorporated a lot of the Argonauts, including the name being the city of the Dioscuros, so the two sons of Zeus were also part of the team, but then rivers which were later copied in other areas. The Phasis does not yet play a role. It's rather later on, perhaps 1, 2, 3 generations later, that we find evidence for alternative Aii located on the Phasis. And then the most famous becomes Kütahya, actually not located on the Phasis River, but on the Rioni River, which has caused a lot of confusion in the geohistorical tradition. But there is dispersed evidence for many different locations, and I recommend that we do not read this different evidence as sloppiness or different uncertain measures, but rather different traditions of different claims at different times by different people for different purposes, but all actually trying to copy the landscape or the top onomastics of Dioscurias. So mytho-geography tries to understand virtual maps or physical worlds, how they evolved over time with an interaction of mythical and historical geographical traditions, and they account for changing names, changing identifications, and also changing symbolic meanings in different historical or literary contexts. So everything is actually in flux. Let us move on. And unfortunately, I should look there because I do not have the full sight of my own slides. So my main chapter, or my first main chapter, is on the Planctae, Scylla and Charybdis. And I start by quoting a little bit from Homer in a somewhat antiquated translation by Murray, from Book 12 of the Odyssey, verses 55 following. I don't give you the full text, but the prediction of Circe for Homer's, for Odysseus' way back home. But when thy comrades shall have rowed past these, namely the Sirens, thereafter I shall not fully say on which side thy course is to lie, but do thou thyself ponder it in mind, and I will tell thee of both ways. For on the one hand are beetling cracks, and against them roars the great wave of dark-eyed Amphitrite, the Planctae, do the blessed gods call these. Thereby not even winged things may pass, no, not the timorous doves that bear ambrosia to Father Zeus, but the smooth rock ever snatches away one even of these. And the Father sends in another to make up the tale. And thereby has no ship of men ever yet escaped that has come thither, but the planks of ship and bodies of men are whirled confusedly by the waves of the sea and the blast of baneful fire. One seafaring ship alone has passed thereby, that Argo famed of all, on her voyage from Aetes, and even her the wave would speedily have dashed there against the great cracks, had not Hera sent her through, for that Jason was dear to her. Now, on the other path are two cliffs, one of which reaches with its sharp peak to the broad heaven, and a dark cloud surrounds it. And I skip a little bit. Therein dwells Scylla, yelping terribly. Her voice is indeed but as the voice of a newborn whelp. But she herself is an evil monster, nor would anyone be glad at sight of her, no, not though it were a god that met her. Verily, she has 12 feet, all misshapen, and 6 necks, exceeding long, and on each an awful head, and therein 3 rows of teeth, thick and close, and full of black teeth. So we have a red figure waist depiction of her, a little bit reduced and not an exact match. We see, yes, we have the canine theme, we have the well, we have the danger, we have the monstrous being, and we can already see that multiple traditions have actually been around in literary and visual culture, but still she is quite recognizable. But the other cliff, thou wilt note, Odysseus, is lower. They are close to each other. Thou couldst even shoot an arrow across, and on it is a great fig tree with rich foliage. But beneath this divine Charybdis sucks down the black water. Thrice a day she belches it forth, and thrice she sucks it down terribly. Okay, and the next station will be Thrinakia. So let's zoom into the Strait of Messina, which in most ancient and modern traditions has been identified with Scylla and Charybdis. So this picture shows us that this is not an exact match, but what does matter is that we have a meaningful strait which was extremely dangerous. This satellite image shows us the very difficult to navigate currents in opposing directions, which is due to the geomorphological structure. At the closest point, there is a distance of 7 kilometers between Sicily and southern Italy, and the depth is only 90 meters. But only a few kilometers farther away, it goes down to 2,000 meters. And when there's tide and movement of large masses of waters, it's becoming extremely difficult and dangerous to this very day. What you actually need is a lot of detailed knowledge to master these dangerous straits. So when it comes to the errings of Odysseus, and let's say everything past Ithaca, then there are many, many uncertainties, but two certainties, well, near certainties. And I'm not very precise here. I finalized the slides in the night. So the Plancts I have equated with Scylla and Charybdis, as we have the description there, parallel, not exactly the same, but probably both understood as the Strait of Messina. That seems to be a clause given in the interpretation of the Odyssey, and also in the majority of our evidence and literature, there is evidence for the Western orientation of the Odyssey. Western orientation means from Ithaca, from Troy, from Ithaca around Sicily. And I have a couple of maps, some of which we have seen earlier today, and I just put this on to see that very few maps would even guide us as far as the Pillars of Heracles, the Strait of Gibraltar, because of the mention of the ocean. But here is a much nicer one, which pinpoints places that we think we know, with identifications which are terribly controversial when it comes to detail. This is still one of the more generous versions, more generous meaning that the travels between, say, Scylla and Charybdis or Sicily on the one side to the other extension would go all the way to Catalonia, northern Spain, and cover the whole of the Western Mediterranean. Whereas here we have Jonathan's map, which shows us a much narrower, much more economic version with a very clear focus around Sicily, but then also typically, but not always, including other parts of southern Italy. And I would say a lot of what Jonathan presents on his very rich website is local traditions talking about these spots and making these identifications, whereas the direction is really something very difficult to establish. And the more schematic version of the journey, where you offer it in a circle and then the underworld in the middle, showing the underworld is somewhere there, reachable from everywhere and not there. So this is the most mysterious place. But on your map, you still locate the Lacus Avernus as the destination, following especially Roman Italian traditions. And then one wonders, yes, you read the passage out to us. The Boreas is the wind from the north that takes us south, but the Cimmerians typically in the imagination are amongst the northernmost people. How does this go together? And it raises many, many questions, and the types of questions are even more diverse, and the confusion that is being raised reaches a pinnacle at the beginning of Book 12 at the description of the Isle of Aiaia, where the dwelling of early dawn is, and her dancing lawns and the risings of the sun, which many scholars have understood as pointing to the east, the sun locations. But I just say that I find many more other directions to the west. But it's important that there is yet one other element that is troubling. It's the mentioning of the Argo, famed of all that has passed by. Are the Planctae actually exactly the same as Scylla or Charybdis? Are they a parallel strait? Are they an invention, as Strabo, the geographer, suggests, invented and then set aside for Homer's creation or account? And I sometimes feel they are actually meant to be exactly the same, but this cannot happen because Jason has been the one who had gone through, and afterwards it was not supposed to be a challenge anymore. So there is a lot of confusion, and that takes us to Black Sea studies and to the Argonautica, which in most literary traditions are clearly located to the Black Sea. I just give you a couple of maps trying to reflect some literary traditions here of Herodotus of Heraclea Pontica from around 400, a very simple version, a relatively early version, although 400 BCE is late in the tradition. But the earliness of the version is demonstrated by the fact that the Argonauts took the same way from Iolkos to Kolkis, where people believed was the location of Aya, and then the same way back, whereas most other traditions actually do not allow Jason to take the Bosporus, the straits of the Bosporus again, but rather invent other ways. One of the most fantastic ways are a combination of the Phasis and the Nile River, then leading back into the Mediterranean. And there are other more complex ways that believe that there was an extension of the Tanais, the Don River, into the Baltic Sea, and then all around Western Europe, leading back into the Mediterranean, and interestingly taking us again to what we believe is Scylla and Charybdis, back to Iolkos, and Apollonius of Rhodes in his Argonautica has yet another version, namely a return to the Danube, and then either the Danube leads into the Adriatic Sea or joins immediately with the Po or Eridanus River, and then there's also a mystical connection with the Rhone River. Again, we end up in the Western Mediterranean. We pass by the Nakia, Scylla, and Charybdis, and return home. So there are multiple versions of the Argonautica, but the passing through whether we call them Planctae or Cyanean rocks, as at the beginning of the Argonautica of Apollonius of Rhodes, they are a real marker on the way, one of the defining markers and one of the major transitions into a world of the beyond, to borrow the words of Irad Malkin. There is a long-standing scholarly tradition, starting with Karl Moily and with Albin Lesky, really very distinguished Hellenists, that claimed that originally both the Odyssey and the Argonautica were directed to the Black Sea. So they give a couple of reasons that Odysseus, initially Odysseus was taken west from Ithaca, but then through mysterious ways he was whirled into the Black Sea And we have seen in Gladstone's map this morning that Scylla was actually, he split the Bosporus to then have a Scylla and a Planctae parallel to each other, merging into the Bosporus. So this is the belief of many, many scholars, and this is connected in most 20th century scholarship with the belief that Greek colonization of the Black Sea started in the first half of the 8th century, and that's based on late antique chronographical literature, which by now actually has been refuted thoroughly. Archaeological evidence shows how these misinterpretations may have come together, but the archaeological evidence would suggest we start Greek colonization in the mid-7th century in the Black Sea area, which causes a complete which forces us to rethink, and a full generation of Homeric scholars have tried to rethink it. On the one hand, we have Martin West, who says Homer knew the Black Sea very well, and that's why he actually wrote very late. So he wrote, West suggests in the 620s or so, and most other, especially Black Sea scholars, say Homer had no clue of the Black Sea, and that's why we should date him traditionally old in the or early in the late 8th century. And the very fact that Homer did not know of the Black Sea gave him the opportunity to wildly imagine an event, such as an opening into the Northern Ocean. That is a very widespread view, not only but pronounced amongst some of my Russian friends, Askar Ivanchik and Viktor Podosinov. And they can lean to a very large degree on Strabo, who in his first books, in his first 2 chapters, very long chapters, book length chapters, makes a very original argument. What a great scholar and geographer Homer was. He knew everything, basically. Not that Homer gives us a scholarly handbook, but he knew everything. And either he gives us history and geography, or he creates new worlds based on his very precise knowledge. And he then argues for the Black Sea location of Aya and Aiaia, the island of Circe. And there are many other minor ancient traditions that would locate Aiaia, the island of Circe, along the Phasis, for example. The argument includes one scholar, Demetrius of Skepsis, around 200 BCE, whom Strabo wants to correct, because this Demetrius wants to locate Aya and Aiaia in the Eastern Ocean, that is east of Africa towards the Indian Ocean. And Strabo says that's complete nonsense, and Strabo gives a very weak argument to refute it. But the real importance of Strabo's account is that he quotes Memnanus, a 7th century poet, and there we read first there are 2 fragments. The one fragment locates Aya in the ocean, in the Okeanos, and not in the Mediterranean, not on a river, not in the Black Sea, in the ocean. Very complicated. What was the ocean? And then even more important for my argument, the city of Aetes, where the rays of the swift sun recline on their golden bed by the rim of the ocean, which the noble Jason visited. And the word thalamos is given here. Aya located in the thalamus of the sun god of Helios. And I think this is a very strong pointer to the west for a westward orientation of Aya, and then also later for Aiaia, which Homer indeed copied after Aya. And if I may come to my conclusions, I think Homer, when he wrote in his in the later 8th century, he located mentally, of course, not very specifically, of course, it is fiction, but it's fiction in an imagined, in a conceptualized space. He conceptualized Circe on Aiaia and the Planctae of the Argonauts in the west, and I think very clearly around Sicily, and I think both also in the Strait of Messina. And the westward orientation is very clearly indicated in Homer through the Zephyrus. It's Aiolos who gives them the Zephyrus to take them back to Ithaca. That's very specific. Scylla and Charybdis are so, well, why is it that then also Scylla and Charybdis do play a role in the Argonautic tradition, in the later tradition, I think, going back to some earlier elements. The total confusion that Odysseus expresses, very important, because there is at some point confusion. Okay, I skip the rest, go on to Hesiod. Hesiod is sometimes wrongly claimed for providing evidence or for the knowledge that the Argonauts went to the Black Sea and to the Phasis. Completely not. The Argonautic tradition is completely disconnected from the Black Sea, from the Phasis River. But when it comes to Odysseus, in Hesiod's work, we learn about offspring that he had with Circe, and the children are named Agrius Latinus and Telegonus, who ruled over the Thracians, the Etruscans. So absolutely strong anchor points in the West. And only afterwards we have Mimnermus with the West direction. And the first firm evidence for Aia in the Black Sea, for Colchis and Phasis being part of the Argonautic tradition, is Pindar in the year 462. And I think we should frame all of this. We should have a closer look at the development of colonial history, colonial explorations. In the 8th century, the Western Mediterranean absolutely attracted the attention of the Greek world. Ever new discoveries, and I think what's reflected in Scylla and Charybdis is a time where these straits were absolutely feared, and the longer way around Sicily was taken to reach southern Italy, or Pithecusae, the earliest attested Greek colony in the west, around 750. But Homer's Odyssey falls into the time when the strait is being managed for the first time, and we sense that fascination with the East. And in a generation, or even a few years before the Odyssey was written, the one version, I call it the Ur-Argonautica, was circulating. They too were driven, they were dwelling on the fascination with Western exploration and colonial settlements. And then we see with the intrusion, or with the settlements, the exploration settlements of the Black Sea in the 650s, 40s, 30s, up to 600, we see a shift, at least for the Argonautic tradition, and then we see the gradual split of the interpretation of the Argonautic journey and the Odyssean journey, with lots of interactions all the way down. And this is where I end. Thank you for your.
Thanks very much, Altay. We do have a bit of time for questions, and let me begin with one. You pointed to Thalamus as a possible indication of the West, but it seems to me that that's somewhat ambiguous. I mean, you both retire to the bedroom, but then you leave the bedroom in the morning. And so is there a reason that you think we should favor an idea of retirement in the West?
It is perhaps that I may also be a little bit biased by the German term Abendland for Occident, Occident. It's the association of the East with the morning, and the going to bed, sleeping, resting with the West, and so well then the Western hemisphere of the Mediterranean. It may be that bias, but I think, and I said it's work in progress. I still have to find more evidence for it. But when I see all the evidence converging, which I've presented, then I think the argument is quite strong, especially as Homer forces us to strongly connect the the direction of the Argonautica and the Odyssey. So I think that the pointers to the West are simply stronger. The strongest counter argument, which you might come up with, and I do it myself, is Eos, or the dances of Eos at the beginning of book 12 of the Odyssey. But that's precisely where Odysseus says, I am completely confused. And I think that is intentional. That is the complete abandonment of the logic. And that's the place from where he then finds access to the underworld. So that's how I would put it now. And there remains speculation. It's somewhat creative. I think we have to be creative trying to fill the gaps. But what I would still want to argue is we should see the beginning of the Odyssey and the Argonautica together, as Moily and Albin and Leski did it, but in the West rather than in the East, and then try to disentangle the literary and mytho-geographical tradition from that starting point.
Thank you. So I'll open it up to others if people have questions.
So Polkets does not figure in the or Argonautica?
The earliest evidence that we can date is 462 BCE in Pindar, in the Pythian Ode, fourth Pythian Ode. I have the reference here. I'm happy to share the slides. And I suggest that the Milesian settlers, who actually, the Milesians were the leaders of Black Sea settlements, they coordinated the major cities on all the major coasts of the Black Sea. But we can the tangible evidence nearly always points to the east, with some mild exceptions to the north, with the Tanais. And Dioscurias seems to be the first because it's typical Dioscurian topography, river names, ethnics neighboring Dioscurias that are then taken and re-implemented also along the phases, and then even in the environment of Trapezus in certain literary traditions. That shows to me that Dioscurias must have been first, and it was the first where Aya no longer was an island in the ocean, but in the recess of the Black Sea. It remains a descriptor of Aya in the Black Sea, but the Ayai along the phases, in the hinterland of the phases, are no longer on an island, nor are they in the recess of the Black Sea. So again, they need the priority of Dioscurias to then somehow make sense in the flourishing tradition. So it evolves over time. And every new step in colonial history may add one of the descriptors and add to the confusion.
Right. Well, because I'm reminded of how, you have the Garden of the Hesperides, which is in the far west, but then you have a very similar thing, which is the Golden Fleece, which is supposed to be in the far east, but they're extremely similar stories. And that seems to support this idea that at some point there was a conflation, although they're not the same thing. They're very similar mythological themes.
So I have tried to bring it back to the lifetime of Homer, assumed the author of the Odyssey and the Iliad, and assuming that there was a recent version of the Ur-Argonautica. And I believe that there were older versions of all these stories, and that there was a very lively tradition of readjusting them, but that these two major works were under the firm impression of new discoveries and settlements in the West, when there was no knowledge yet of the Black Sea. The Black Sea was closed to Greek and even Phoenician colonization and trade. And probably it's the fall of the Phrygian kingdoms after the storm of the Cimmerians in the early 7th century that the control and the monopoly on the Thracian Bosporus was actually lost, and gradually Greeks started to explore, and the Milesians took the lead in fact, controlling the area. But that's so much later. And beforehand, there was simply no knowledge, but there was not much interest.
Yeah, and they changed the name of the sea.
And it was in that later phase that the interest or the stories were reinvented in the Black Sea areas. West tries to think about an Ur-Argonautica, that is before Black Sea, before West, and he thinks it may be somewhere in the Pagasean Gulf, so in the Aegean. He thinks the origin is there, and then one of the islands, the Aegean islands, may have been Aya in the oldest imagination of the Thessalians that may have come up with it. It's possible. I can't speak to that.
Naomi, one very quick point, and then we're going to.
I might play devil's advocate here and say that even if colonization in the Black Sea region hadn't occurred yet, would they not have heard reports from Hittites and from other peoples moving around? Well, not the Hittites, but the after Hittites, Near Eastern history is not my strong suit, you can tell. But people traveling in the region talking about this large sea, this large maritime expanse, like reports, would that not potentially give them an idea that, hey, there is something over there too, and expand the knowledge of in the kind of vague mythical realm?
Hesiod knows of passes.
So I did not understand.
And Hesiod knows of passes.
He knows the passes, yes, in a different context, and he knows 3 rivers of the Black Sea in a disconnected, and I think that maybe from an Assyrian source. That's what I've suggested. And he does not know the Tanais. He knows the Danube, the Phasis, and the Thermodon, which is quite interesting. And he does not know anything towards the north. So one might argue that this would recommend a northern opening, but most scholars would actually recommend the assumed opening through the Phasis. There is room for speculation, but what Homer knew were the Phrygians. So that's why basically the Trojans are Phrygians. So there was knowledge, even though the long distance trade and the networks were not as intense as they had been in the Bronze Age. Strangely, the Greeks of the Archaic period had no more knowledge of the Hittites. That knowledge was completely lost, at least in the evidence that has come down to us. We have to be a little bit more humble and admit this. So yes, there was exchange, there was trade, but we do not know how many people engaged in long distance trade themselves going east, and how much was from A to B, from B to C, from C to D, and so on. And what we find in Hesiod is very limited and very disconnected. It does not give us any sense of the Black Sea. And when we look into Homer's Iliad, and when we have references to other Asia Minor places, even the Aetes and the Paphlagonians, they are not mentioned as bordering the Black Sea. They are from I'm not sure if he says Anatolia, Asia probably. So that's, again, something we should actually consider. And then there's an interpolation of cities that were only founded in the late 7th century, possibly even later. So that's another problem that we cannot discuss in the given time frame.
Well, I think this conversation can continue, certainly. So let's thank Altay again for